Paltrocast.
I'm going to say good afternoon. I appreciate that you have the branding on yourself right there. They're supporting the tour and all that. But my question related to that, are you the first comic that Monster has backed? Because I know about a lot of bands and athletes, but not comics.
You know what? I'm not up on my endorsement history. I think there's Sam Morrill, who's a comedian I look up to a bunch. I think he did something with Monster a while back. I think this is the first time they're doing the Highly-Laffeinated tour. So, tell you what, I'm making history one way or the other.
You are. So the way that sponsorships and tours goes, some people beat you over the head with it, where they, let's say it's a whiskey they're pushing. In the middle of it, they do a cheers to the audience. Do you have your portion of the set where you make everyone cheers?
Ah, dude, no. And honestly, I don't think that's what they would want out of me. I will say the show is gonna be what it is, no matter what. But they've been pretty cool about not getting into anything related to content with me. So they're supporting the tour and they're branding the tour, and I think they're just trusting that I'm gonna be myself on stage. And for better or for worse, I'm definitely gonna be myself on stage.
Got it. So the tour is an interesting mix of rock clubs and traditional comedy clubs. Was that your doing, or is that a really smart agent's doing?
That's an agent. I'm sort of down to go wherever. I find that like my best shows are have way more to do with the audience and the vibe than, the venue. Obviously, there's some very historic, great venues on the list that new places and places I'm returning to that I'm excited to work with. But if you guys have a microphone, I'll go up there and tell some jokes.
Cool. So what was your home club? What club did you first get passed at or do a lot of sets at?
My home club is a club called Sesh Comedy in New York City. It's got two locations, both on the Lower East Side.
Hmm.
Um, the first club, that's probably where I did the most sets and developed the most as a comic. I also have to shout out Stand Up New York in New York City as the first club that passed me, and Cheaper Than Therapy in San Francisco as the first venue that really supported giving me a ton of stage time.
Got it. That was while you were going to Stanford that you were passed there?
hmm Yeah, I would do class like 9 to 5, and then I would just get in my car and drive up to San Francisco and go work at the shows, and then come home, do it all over again.
A lot of my favorite comics, they got their start, or at least they cut their teeth while living in San Francisco. Did that have anything to do with why you went to school out there?
I definitely wanted to go to school near a comedy city. I was looking at on the East Coast. Um, I was looking at pretty much just any major city, so I would have gone somewhere that I needed to drive to. I didn't know how good the Bay Area scene is for developing comics until I got out there. And I think there's also a fair amount of luck I had with the timing, because like San Francisco will raise a class of comics, and then when they sort of mature enough, they'll usually take off to like LA or New York.
Mhm.
So I got in right as a class all moved out together. So there was a little bit of open room in the scene there, which made it just like very lucky timing for me.
Who is that class of comics from San Francisco? Pardon my ignorance.
Oh no, you're good. They have like or they used to have a podcast together called Pier 69, but it's Mark Smalls who opens for Bert Kreischer, and Daoud Neymar, who's a very funny comic, Joey Avery, who's now in New York, Andrew Arolfo, who is in LA, and I was just at Moon Tower with. So those guys were the guys that had been there and were sort of like ready to take off and make the move, and they all sort of moved to LA or New York right when I got in, which was great timing for me.
Got it. So you also, and I point this out because not all comics are good at or successful with social media. You are, take the compliments, my words, not yours, very good with social media. When did your ascent with social media happen versus getting past at the comedy clubs? Is it around the same time?
So I started working a bunch at Sesh, which is what I think of as my homeroom, for 3 months before I ever started posting on social media. And it was sort of all the stage time I got there that helped me discover that I felt like pretty comfortable doing crowd work.
Hmm.
Um, and obviously with social media, I think the biggest thing, which, call it whatever you want. Some people will call it a skill, or other people will just call it like a willingness to work. But the most important thing is just putting out a ton of content, because you can have, one or two funny bits that you put out, but if you don't give people an opportunity to engage with hours of, either crowd work or material, whatever you have, they're not really going to get to know you as a comic. So for
Sure.
me, it was like, well, I was newer when I started posting, so I didn't have any like material banked, and everything I had, I kind of needed to hold on to and not burn. So I started realizing I could do crowd work in those first 3 months, and then I started putting out a mix of crowd work and material in, I guess, yeah, fall of 2021. And then from there, I just started putting out only crowd work so that I could sort of keep up with the demanding pace of how much content people can consume.
That is a very interesting thing. There sounds like a few things went on. One is that the pandemic gave you time to rebuild and grow your fan base, and also coincided with your ascent. Or do I have that timeline wrong?
Yeah, it was sort of the end of the pandemic. It was like, remember when the vaccine had come out, but it was still sort of like, it was like, are there going to be new strains? But comedy clubs were open, but everyone was like kind of scared. That was like, that summer was when I had started working at Session, and comedy clubs were mobbed because it was that first summer that everyone felt like it was over, and then we sort of took a step back.
Right.
But clubs were open, and I was able to work during that time sort of the whole way through. There were like some scares, and audience kind of varied throughout. But
Oh yeah.
during that time, that was when I was really like hitting social media hard. And then in those first couple months of it, people are like sort of just seeing you for the first time. So it's like the growth is higher, but also like people are meaner and less supportive, and now it's kind of the opposite, where it's like the growth is a little more slow, but usually like because there's already like a base of people who are into it, no one's like, who is this guy? He sucks, you know?
The beginning of the pandemic, to me, nothing was worse than stand-up comedy. And I like Sinbad a lot. He's a nice human being. I grew up watching his stand-up, but I watched him doing stand-up over Zoom, and it was like doing crowd work at the other people on Zoom. And a lot of people going, oh, this is the new business model for comedy because comedy clubs are all closing and never coming back. And of course, it only took a couple of months for people to realize that all these remote specials filmed in front of cars was not going to work. Were you ever worried that it was not going to come back?
You know what? I was trying not to think too much about it. I did Zoom. Here's the thing, is comedy is torture, everybody knows it. So it's like part of why you do it is because you love it, but another part of why you do it is because like your whole community is doing it. So it was like when everyone stopped doing it, it was sort of like a little bit of a relief, where I was like, okay, like if no one's doing it, then I can like be free for just a little bit. I was also younger in my career, so like I think stand-up gets it gets more boring over time, but it also gets like emotionally easier to do. Because at that
Mhm.
time I found it to be super scary. So it was like someone being like, oh, like you don't have to get a vaccination. You're like, I know I should. Sorry, vaccination's like the wrong analogy because we're talking about COVID, but
I'm not offended. Don't worry.
it's like getting a shot. Like, you should get it, but you don't want to get it because it's a needle in your skin. That's what comedy felt like to me. I was like, I know I should do it, but it was painful to do because I wasn't that good and it was scary. So I think I was a little relieved. I tried some Zoom stuff. I was like, this cannot be it. First of all, every Zoom show had like one crazy guy in it that had just like managed to get into the room and was just there to show
Yeah.
people that what they were doing was stupid, you know? And like, so I did a few of them, and every single time there was like one insane person who had like managed to sneak in, and I was like, okay, like this is not it for me. And then as for it coming back, I sort of suspected it would come back, but I didn't. have a strong theory about it. I just knew that as soon as people were doing things, I was going to do things too. And then, you know, I couldn't have predicted how much sort of comedy had a boom in the last few years since COVID. I mean, I like
Yeah.
everybody who I knew who was just, was on the way up during that time or before the pandemic is now like really exploded. So comedy's just had like a kind of a golden age, which is awesome. I'm lucky.
When I was a kid, the stand-up comic was just a stand-up comic. Very rarely they'd have bit parts in movies. But I think somewhere in the early 2000s, because of all the Judd Apatow movies, all the stand-up comics also realized they could write the movie, produce the movie, etc. So now no one's really just a comic anymore of newer generations. Is there a long-term plan that you eventually want to do all that, or are you purely a comic?
I do want to do all that. I'm working on two feature film projects that are sort of in their very early stages, a television show pitch, and I'm always sort of auditioning for things. Um, but like the cool thing about stand up right now is it does pay the bills and I'm still in my 20s, traveling the country, seeing different cities, like exploring, all that sounds great to me. I think in the 10-year plan, do I want to be, in Appleton, Wisconsin on a Saturday night? Like, no. I mean, I don't even want to be there now. But, you know, that I think that will change. And hopefully, as I grow as an entertainer and a performer, those avenues will open up to me as well. I'm not rushing it. And I think no matter what, I want to sort of put out a body of work as a stand-up comic. I don't ever want to give up stand-up comedy. But, like, you know, I've got some buddies who have been cast on TV shows and they'll make what I make in hours and hours of working off of, one episode. And so like that doesn't sound so bad either.
Got it. So the fact that you have a 10-year plan or something like that, you're a lot different than a lot of the self-destructive comics of the 70s and 80s. It's like this well-adjusted new generation of comics. I find that, yes, they're in therapy, but they also have vision boards. I that's Am I off base with that? There's
No, I think you're
a
right.
well-adjusted
Like
generation.
there's this stereotype of like comics are these demented, awful, like dirt bags. And honestly, like my friend group of comics are like well educated, fancy colleges and had their shit together and have like other job opportunities if comedy doesn't work out. But I will say this, we're all young. If you give us like 10 years on the road, I'm sure we'll turn out to be like absolute scumbags. I mean, I've been on the road now for 2 years and it does really chip away at your soul. So I'm sure I'll lose my entire capacity for empathy and joy eventually. But I will say right now, it does feel like comedy's in sort of a new, it's mainstream in the sense that like the career opportunities are clear. Being a business person and a smart-minded, sort of thoughtful strategist pays off now in comedy more than ever before.
Mhm.
And I think that's being reflected in sort of the class of comics coming up right now.
You raise a really good point about the Ivy League stuff because back in the day, National Lampoon, the Simpsons writers, the SNL writers were Ivy League people. Then at a certain point, it became street people from Boston or people who moved to Boston and became street people. And then now there's you and Sierra Cattow and all these Ivy Leaguers. I didn't really make that connection that there's a lot of Ivy League or well-educated people in comedy these days that are kind of seeing the business plan and path and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I look, like I think it only makes sense to do comedy if you're so poor that it doesn't matter, or if you're so rich that it doesn't matter. If you're in the middle class, I think you should go work at a bank or something. But I mean, I grew up, my family had money, and I was like, I want to at least try to do something interesting with my life rather than settle. Like they paid for college, I didn't have student loans, and I wanted to like try to take a chance on something I really liked, and I'm very lucky that it's worked out as well as it has. I think like if, I might not be a comedian if I needed to pay the bills immediately. So I'll just say my privilege definitely factored in on that one. But also once I started getting into it, I was like, this is actually like there's a business here, that is real in a way that I don't think it was even a few years ago with comedy. Like, people being able to build their own audiences online has really changed things for talent. So that's pretty cool.
Well, one comment about the privilege thing, one question, then you're free. And it's a compliment about the privilege thing. When I saw your last name on, that looks really familiar. And then I thought, oh yeah, I used to be in the Savoy Label Group office all the time for meetings with A&R people. Your family's influence on jazz is really, really cool and impressive. In other words, if you were going to have to like have that extra grind of like, yeah, I came from a family, at least yours it was around cool, struggling art people.
Wait, my family had an influence on jazz?
Yeah, the Nippon Columbia catalog of jazz.
Huh.
Oh, so you don't care about that. That's pretty
I just
cool.
didn't know that. What is it my dad like signed jazz artists when he was
So
in the music
it wasn't
business?
your dad back in the day like a Sony Columbia guy,
Yeah.
and then it went to like BMG. I come from the music
Yeah.
industry
Yeah,
originally.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then he had the SLG Savoy Label Group, which had like a bunch of sub labels. It was like 458 Entertainment or something like that. And what I'd heard from the A&R guys, like they were signing the Gin Blossoms and Blues Traveler, but was really making the money was he had owned all these jazz master
Huh.
recordings.
That's cool. I just know that like I got to like stay at nice hotels growing up, but it's like cool to know that like that happened, that helped people out.
Did you get to go to Japan a bunch?
I did get to go to Japan with him back in those days, and then when he got out of that business, we stopped going. But yeah, it was pretty cool. I got to like wander around Tokyo, and he would go out and do a bunch of business meetings, and I would just chill.
That is the best way to see Japan. Well,
Yeah.
the polite closing question here. Uh, well, before I get to that, were you a fan of the Norm Macdonald show that he had on Amazon? And that was like the podcast thing.
I'm a fan of Norm. I haven't seen that show.
He used to have his co-host Adam Egget, who was booking the Comedy Store, ask this one question that was an inside joke and go, so where do you get your ideas from? And it was meant to cause this like awkward silence at pause. So you never ask a comic that. But in your case, when you're not busy with the road and writing material, what's your like side passion two kind of thing? Where does your time actually go?
You mean like what's my creative process behind writing, or do you mean like what are my hobbies outside of comedy?
Yeah, what do you do when you don't have to be on stage? Because comedy is a lot of waiting around. You're on stage for that time, you're backstage before you go on, you say hi to the comics after you perform, and then you kind of go home and go, now what? And
Yeah.
that all time is what killed a lot of comics or made them better people. So I'm curious what you do with yourself.
Oh man, I mean, during tour, it's like a lot of rest. I have one way that I like to spend the days on the road, which is I like to go to vintage stores because I feel like you can weirdly learn a lot about a city through seeing like the clothing that people gave up around there. So especially like the weirder the city, the more I like to go to vintage stores. Like Fayetteville, Arkansas had a great one. A lot of spots in North Carolina. Spokane, Washington had a really good one. That's one thing I'll do. I like to just like rest, and I sleep a ton usually when I'm on the road. That helps me stay healthy. Exercise clears my mind, and then if I can, I'll try and listen to my sets and write a little bit, so that I can sort of develop the act. But the truth is, like lately, in the last couple of years, it's been like almost entirely comedy focus. And I'm either like sleeping, writing, or performing, or editing clips to put on social media. I think in the full course of time, I'd like to do a little bit more outdoorsy stuff, like be able to ski on the road, in when I'm in like places that have ski hills in the winter, and then doing a little more like hiking when I'm in beautiful locations. But it's taken a little bit of time not to be like, if I go for a hike, will I be thinking about the show and I'll be stressed out and thinking like, why am I on a trail right now and I have to be at the club later? So I'm working on getting out of my shell for that, but right now it's a lot of like I'm taking it very, very seriously just so I don't mess it up, so that I can like really, sharpen and develop my skills. So it's like listen to sets, write as much material as possible so I'm not doing the same stuff all weekend on the road, edit clips so I can keep promoting the shows, sleep, maybe go to a vintage store like a brunch, and then do the show.
That sounds routine-esque, but in a healthy way, not in an OCD way, in a realistic businessy kind of way.
I take it very seriously. I treat it like business right now. I hope I can get to the point where I can be an asshole, but right now I'm like all business. It just feels too fragile. I don't want to give it up.
Well, thank you for your time. Congrats on the Java Monster Highly-Laffeinated Presents tour coming up. Hope to make it to the New York show. But in the meantime, keep up the great work and looking forward to what is to come from you, Lucas.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Paltrocast.